what a lot of people end up doing is they end up taking loans against their Bitcoin as a way to defer the capital gains taxes that are on their way.
What's been the biggest frustration maybe for yourself or friends or family or your students that you're teaching when it comes to selling and having a big capital gains tax with cryptocurrency?
Yeah, the most annoying thing is that the IRS treats it as a commodity. So whenever you use it for anything, so you could, for example, go and pay for coffee using Bitcoin. There are lots of apps that do that. And if you go to a Bitcoin conference, typically they will take Bitcoin for it. But you have to report capital gains on every single transaction. So a lot of people are disincentivized to do it. In addition, if you have held it for something like over 5 years, you are almost like in the 12-year history of Bitcoin, if you've held for 5 years, no one has ever lost money. So you end up with often a very large capital gains bill if you end up selling or liquidating it in any way. So that tends to be a big frustration for a lot of people that have made a lot of money using it, because it's hard to sort of like cash out, if you will. So what a lot of people end up doing is they end up taking loans against their Bitcoin as a way to defer the capital gains taxes that are on their way. That way, even if it costs like 9, 10, 11% that it does at like Unchained Capital and many other places. But, like in a sense, it ends up being okay because the Bitcoin appreciation tends to beat that by a significant amount. So even if you are paying like 11% interest, if Bitcoin goes up like 70%, then you're still up by not selling the Bitcoin, incurring the capital gains tax. Instead, you get the upside of Bitcoin and you just pay that interest. Of course, you have to have some downside protection in case there's a sudden drop or something like that, and make sure that your loan to value ratios are proper and that they won't liquidate you and so on. But it is a device that a lot of my friends have used in order to overcome the capital gains taxes that are inherent to it.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. I think that is wise, right? Because when you do loan against something, it's a non-taxable event, right? You're borrowing against it, but you got to be careful of the margins, right? A margin call if the values drop, and then they might even just sell your asset in order to cover that margin, and or ask you to put more money in to cover that. So it's interesting, right? With real estate, there's a thing called a 1031 exchange. And people do the same thing with real estate, right? They say in some of my clients, they never sell; they only ever borrow against. But if they over leverage, they could lose multiple assets in foreclosure. So you've got to be careful with that. Now, we do have an alternative to that for our listeners who are wondering. It's called a Deferred Sales Trust, which you can actually sell high, defer all the tax, and then from there diversify it into multiple assets such as stocks, bonds, mutual funds, investment, real estate, or a business venture. In fact, we just closed a deal, Jimmy. I'm curious what you think about this. They bought Ethereum. Over time, a client of mine out of the Silicon Valley, they've been in the industry for a long time. Over time, they purchased about $100,000 of Ethereum over about a 5 to 7 year period. I think that's interesting to say. If any 5-year period of time, you haven't lost on Bitcoin, and they did very well. In fact, the Ethereum went to about 6 million in 2017. And then in 2021, it jumped up to 9 million, and then even a few months later to 13 million. It dropped all the way back down to about 7, and then it jumped up to about 9 or 10. So it's kind of this wave, and they were able to sell about 5 million of it, defer all the tax using the Deferred Sales Trust, and their goal is to diversify that. Now, for them, the outcome was, how do I sleep well at night and be able to get some cash flow coming in from some real estate? Diversify some of that money. And they still are a long-term believer in the full amount, but they want to take some chips off the table. And so for our listeners who are wondering about that, you can go to capitalgainstaxsolutions.com and learn more about that.